In the spirit of reconciliation, the FCAV acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and in our case, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledge that they never ceded sovereignty. We also acknowledge, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Oh, isn't it coming down? Someone's still got their so we continue. We also acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's continuous connection to land, water, and community. We pay our respects to them, their cultures and customs, and to elders past and present. So with us today, we have Simone McKenry, who is the Project Support Officer from NoFASD Australia, which my understanding is, and Simone will probably elaborate more, but was founded in 1998 by Sue Myers. And she had personal experience of caring for a child with FASD. And of course, at that time, there were very few supports. And they now provide a fantastic helpline, newsletter, information and support to individuals and families. And it can be parents or carers or individuals living with FASD. And they also have a really great website. So a very big welcome to you, Simone, and great to have you with us today. And I'm really looking forward to learning more. And I will hopefully be able to disappear. Yes, okay. There you go.
All right. Thank you so much, Deb. And thank you for having me, everyone. And hopefully we'll get through lots of information for you in this session. So as Deb mentioned, my name is Simone McKenry. I'm the Helpline Services Project Officer at NoFASD Australia. A bit of background about myself. I previously worked as a psychiatric nurse, and then I spent some time in education in the classroom supporting young people with behavioural and learning challenges. And then for the last 2.5 years, I've been working for NoFASD Australia. So it's been a journey, and I'm drawing on lots of different areas of experience to work with NoFASD. We also acknowledge and pay respects to past, present and emerging traditional custodians of the Wurundjeri lands of the Kulin Nation, and I extend my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us today. So some of the content we're talking about today might be upsetting and distressing for some people, so I want you to prioritise your wellbeing, and if you do feel that, you can step out or contact one of the services on the screen. So as Deb mentioned, we have been around for 25 plus years. NoFASD Australia is the national organisation for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders. We are Australia's peak body in supporting individuals and families living with FASD. As Deb mentioned, that Sue Myers is our founder, and there was not much information for her when she was trying to navigate getting a diagnosis for her daughter, and ended up having to go to Canada to get a diagnosis, and as a result has worked tirelessly over the years to get some awareness and information and resources available in Australia. So it's been fantastic. So we really provide a lot of lots of supports. We promote awareness, prevention, diagnosis and improved outcomes for individuals and their families. Some of the services that we provide, as Deb mentioned, is the helpline. It runs 365 days a year, and it's available for anyone to call. Whether it's just you want to ask information about FASD, you might want to find some FASD-informed specialist or practitioners. We can sort of provide a small referral list, but some options that we have in Victoria and other states as well. We also have a Families Linking with Families support group, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It's a peer support group, and also lots of resources on our website, which are for parents and carers and, other practitioners and professionals as well. So lots of information that you can get from our services. So I'm just going to give a bit of a general understanding of what FASD is so that we're all on the same page. Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder is a diagnostic term used to describe the impacts on the brain and body of individuals prenatally exposed to alcohol. FASD is a lifelong disability. Individuals with FASD will experience some degree of challenges in their daily living and need support with things like their motor skills, physical health, learning, communication, attention, emotional regulation, and social skills to reach their full potential. Each individual with FASD is unique and has both areas of strengths and challenges. So you'll find that one person living with FASD can present quite differently to another person living with FASD. They, depending on when the alcohol was exposed during their development, will depend on how they're impacted by that. So I just really want to emphasise that it is a lifelong disability and it's a permanent brain injury. So we will see lots of challenges for these individuals across their lifespan. So what causes FASD? Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is caused by alcohol exposure during pregnancy. Alcohol is a neurotoxin or a poison and a teratogen, which is a known agent to cause birth defects and permanent brain injury to the fetus. There's a lot of misconception in community that the placenta acts as a filter. This is not the case. Bub may be experiencing the same amount of alcohol level as mum, blood alcohol level as mum, or could be higher depending on the age and stage because they don't have the enzymes and structures to process that alcohol, so that it's likely to stay in their system a lot longer. So alcohol can cause harm at any stage during the pregnancy. And I'll show you, oops, oh no, it's on the next slide. So there really is no safe amount of alcohol during pregnancy or breastfeeding for that matter. But it's not just about the amount of alcohol. There are a lot of other factors that do influence the impacts of the alcohol on the fetus. So depending on how mum metabolises, everyone metabolises alcohol at different rates. Nutrition, poor nutrition can interfere with the transfer of oxygen and nutrients to the bub. Placental health, poor placental health can also interrupt that nice delivery of nutrients. And then mum's genetics, the way she processes alcohol can also impact that alcohol consumption. And then maternal age plays a significant role as, as people age, their metabolism changes. So that's sort of from one perspective. And then we look at paternally. Dad's genetics that he can pass on to bub, and also we do know that alcohol impacted sperm doesn't cause FASD but can cause learning and birth defects. It also, if dad's drinking and mum's drinking as well, that increases the risk of FASD. And also alcohol impacted sperm can affect the development of the placenta and result in poor placental health as well. So dads do have a role to play as well. There's lots of research in that space that's sort of emerging at the moment. And then we look at the fetus. The susceptibility of the fetus is quite dependent on their genetics and their makeup. There are twin studies that have shown one child getting FASD and the other one not. So it does depend on that fetus's genetic and how they are able to process and metabolize that alcohol. And then we've got the exposure, so the amount. We know the higher the amount, the higher the risk. And also timing. So we do know that those early 12 weeks of pregnancy are quite highly sensitive to alcohol, and are stages when often mums don't know that they're pregnant, or people don't know they're pregnant. And particularly if it's an unplanned pregnancy, they may not be aware and may be consuming alcohol during those stages, which is quite at high risk. And then frequency, we know that the more often alcohol is consumed across the pregnancy, the more compounding that impact is. So this is just a look at the gestational cycle, and as we see in the red, that's those from week 2 to week 12 is when those major structures like the brain and body and organs are developing, and if exposed to alcohol at those stages, they can be quite sensitive to alcohol and can interrupt their development and impact the development of the fetus. And then the orange shows that the fetus is sensitive to alcohol at those stages as well. So really right across the pregnancy, it is safer to be alcohol-free. So prevalence in Australia, FASD is the leading cause of non-genetic learning and neurodevelopmental disabilities worldwide, and it's estimated to impact about 1% of the general worldwide population. In Australia, last year, researchers completed some studies, and they combined the data on alcohol use in pregnancy in Australia with the known risk of FASD to estimate a national prevalence around 3.64%. So that sort of equates to approximately one child in every Australian classroom that may be living with FASD. So as we can see from this infographic here, FASD is much more common than autism, but autism is quite, there's a lot of public awareness around autism, and particularly around the diagnostic infrastructure of autism, whereas FASD, due to things like stigma and lack of understanding and awareness, it often goes misdiagnosed or undiagnosed in the community. So we really need to shift that messaging and particularly around the stigma of alcohol use during pregnancy, because 50% of pregnancies are unplanned. So there is a high likelihood that the person doesn't know they're pregnant and doesn't know that they're causing harm. So it's important to be aware of that. And then there are reasons why people, they don't choose necessarily to abstain, because of complex reasons that might be making it difficult for them to support an alcohol-free pregnancy. There also could be lack of awareness, which we're finding in the community. There's a lot of lack of awareness around the impacts of alcohol during pregnancy. So we really need to shift that shaming and blaming, particularly mothers, and really working towards supporting the child in front of us. So it is quite a hidden disability. Around 17% of individuals will have the facial features. I'll show you those in a moment. But generally, most individuals with FASD do not have any physical symptoms or characteristics present that really shows that they have a disability. So that can be quite challenging for individuals, and they can be easily misunderstood. And they're also there's a lack of awareness in community around FASD. So there's often a lot of blame and shame on parents because of their parenting skills, when in fact it's actually a brain-based disability that's causing those challenges for the child, and it's not because of bad parenting. And there's also some misunderstandings in the community that only certain socioeconomic groups or cultures are impacted by FASD, when we know wherever there is alcohol, there is risk of FASD. So that shame and stigma really does silence individuals and their families to share about their experiences with alcohol during pregnancy. We're also, as I mentioned, seeing a lot of misdiagnosis of FASD, so a lot of ADHD or autism diagnoses before an actual FASD diagnosis is recognised. We often see some of those secondary challenges like mental health, substance use and poor behaviours that might be overshadowing the actual true cause of the disability, and that's FASD. And then, as I mentioned, those barriers to that prevent diagnosis, which is the lack of awareness and training of our professionals to actually be confident in recognising and diagnosing FASD. And also costs can be another barrier, which is another big challenge that we're really working towards trying to resolve, but it is an uphill battle, unfortunately. So the Australian Diagnostic Guidelines, they were developed in 2016 and were updated last year to include more lived experience voice, and also to include a FASD Indigenous framework to support Indigenous communities with learning and understanding about FASD. So a typical diagnosis in Australia involves a multidisciplinary team approach, and that team includes professionals such as paediatricians, psychiatrists, psychologists, neurologists, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, social workers, possibly physios. So there's quite a comprehensive team to go through the diagnostic process, and a medical assessment will be sort of a history will be taken by the paediatrician or a GP or a psychiatrist, and then prenatal alcohol exposure, confirmation of prenatal alcohol exposure, and then some assessments around those neurodevelopmental functionings and behaviours to form a diagnosis. So the pathway to a diagnosis is evidence of prenatal alcohol exposure. Now, this is quite a difficult area, and, you know, obviously, to get confirmation of that, there's conversations that have to be had with the birth mother, and sometimes that birth mother is not present, and particularly in you know, the foster carer space, sometimes there's no contact with the foster the biological mother, so that can be really challenging to get that information. There are other ways information can be accessed, and that's through some evidence from family members that have witnessed alcohol consumption during pregnancy. Sometimes medical records or hospital records, maternal and child health records might be able to have information in them that will describe some interaction with alcohol, as well as child protection and also police reports. So it takes a little bit to get that information if you don't have a relationship with biological mum, or if also in some circumstances that the biological mum is denying it. The other option is that there's the presence of the three sentinel facial features. So if you have all three features, then a diagnosis can proceed without the confirmation of alcohol. But as I said, there's only around 17% that have those sentinel facial features, and not all of them have those three features. So it can be quite challenging to get past that point so that a diagnosis can be proceed. So I will just show you those sentinel facial features. So there's three features. The first one is the smooth philtrum, which is the groove from the bottom of the nose to the upper lip, and that's quite smooth. And in the photographs 5 and 4, the top two photographs on the screen, they show that smooth philtrum. The second one is a thin upper lip, and as we see that in 5 and 4 on the screen. And the third one is the smooth, the small pulperable fissure, which is the width from the inside to the outside of the eye. So they are the three features that that maybe look at that the medical team will look for to try and confirm alcohol exposure. There are other features as well that we do see with some children with FASD or people with FASD, but they're not necessarily unique to FASD, but the three sentinel facial features are unique to alcohol exposure. So you may see that sort of flattening mid-face, you might see the double folds on the eyelids, sort of what they call railway track ears, where there's two sort of folds around the ear development, you know, shortened nose, and a low nasal bridge between the eyes. So they're some of the features that are associated with FASD, but not necessarily an indicator that FASD is present. So after there's confirmation of alcohol, then to proceed to do the assessment. So the assessment team will assess 9 different domains. Now, not all 9 will be assessed, depending on what areas that individual might be experiencing challenges in. So the 9 domains, I will show you, I'll talk to those domains in a lot more detail in the next few slides, but they have to be significantly impaired in at least 3 of those domains to get a diagnosis. What we see is a lot of individuals probably are impaired in 4 to 5 of those domains. And then that's impairment needs to have functional impacts that require significant supports and also have been an onset in early development, not something that has developed later on in their adulthood or adolescence. And then the medical team will also rule out any other genetic conditions that might attribute to some of these assessment results. And then we also look at the specifiers, which is, as I said, the sentinel facial features. We often see low birth weight and small head circumference with children with FASD, and yes, that small physical stature. So that's sort of the process of an assessment. It is challenging, it is complex, and there are limited professionals that feel confident in doing the diagnosis. So, as I said, we've got a small number. In Victoria, VicFAS does do the assessments up to the age of 10. They've got 2 clinics. They've got Jacana, which is 0 to 3 clinic that does diagnosis of FASD, and then clinic 3 to 10 years old. And I believe at the moment that they've got quite a significant wait list, so of approximately 2 years, I think. There are other options, but they do cost money, and I've had reports of it costing up anywhere near $8,000 to $10,000, so it can be quite significant, which is very difficult for families to get a diagnosis. So I'll go through the domains now. So one of the domains is communication, and this is just expressive and receptive language. So how they verbalise and talk and communicate, and how they understand what's being communicated to them. So processing that information and understanding that information. So this can be quite challenging, and individuals can have be impacted in both areas. They can be impacted in both their verbal skills as well as their comprehension skills, or they can only be impacted in one area. So just depending on how the alcohol is impacted on them. So some of the challenges we might see are really misunderstanding directions, appearing not to listen, but they're actually confused or actually don't understand what's being said to them or haven't processed what's being said to them, and often trouble expressing their thoughts or feelings. So having trouble communicating what's going on for them can be a challenge for them. Intellectual abilities, around 26% of individuals with FASD will also have an intellectual disability, but it's not as common as people think. There was a myth in the community that you had to have an intellectual disability to get FASD, which is not the case. We have people with FASD that have quite ranges of IQs across the spectrum of quite high to average to low. So it's not always an indicator. And that's just really having trouble with those reasoning and really complex sort of ideas, and will affect them through their decision making and that slow processing speed. Then we look at attention. So around 68% of individuals with FASD will also be diagnosed with ADHD, and we do see a lot of children getting an early diagnosis of ADHD, and then later on it's sort of more information comes to the forefront, and they get a FASD diagnosis, but often they're initially diagnosed with ADHD. So we might be seeing some attention challenges around focusing and shifting that focus and staying on task. We might see them quite fidgety and, moving around a lot, or we might see them quite inattentive and just sort of appear like they're sort of daydreaming a bit. So they can be easily distracted and, difficulty completing tasks, really having trouble just staying on activities. Then we look at memory, difficulty storing, retrieving and recalling the information. Their memory system is sort of like a jumbled filing cabinet. So the information goes in and then it's really hard to find it when they need it. So there's often that inconsistent recall. So they often forget routines and rules. They say, I don't know often because they often wanting to respond really quickly and give you an answer that they think you might want to hear because they actually can't find that information and source it in the time that's required. They also may appear to be lying when there's gaps in the memory, the brain will fill in information and it might provide some false information which can make them appear like they're lying when they're actually not. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. Executive function challenges, so things around difficulty with planning, organisation, emotional regulation, impulse control are all really challenging. So they can often melt down quite quickly when their routine changes or when, there's been a transition, they're, shifting their attention or they're being flexible with moving around can be really challenging for them. They often have trouble starting a task and also trouble finishing a task. So just that planning and organising how they're going to start a task can be really challenging. So you might lay out clothes for them and they might find it really hard to choose what they need to put on first. So they might start with putting on their pants first before they put on their underpants. Things like that, being able to really work out where they start. So sometimes it can be quite challenging for them, so they'll actually won't even try. And also that impulsivity, so acting without thinking about the consequences can be really challenging for them. Emotional and behavioural regulation, so difficulty managing those emotions, those stresses, those impulses and behavioural responses. So they can be really quick to escalate. Often people say they go from 0 to 100 really, really quickly. Sometimes we talk about, well, where is their 0? It might be a lot higher. They might be sort of, because there's so much going on for them, they're really trying to keep up with everything in lots of different areas, that their 0 might be sitting at 50 or 60, and then that's probably why we see that quick escalation. Often quick outbursts or shutdowns. They might withdraw as well. Typically calming down can be really a big challenge for them. So once they've escalated and in that sort of escalated meltdown sort of scenario, have a lot of challenges getting back into that calm space. And they often have those strong reactions to those small triggers. Adaptive behaviour and social skills. So these are our daily living skills, how we can manage our hygiene and our organising ourselves and organising our belongings can be really, really challenging for individuals with FASD, as well as interpreting social cues. They often misread social settings or situations, and they can be really quite vulnerable to peer pressure or peer manipulation because they just aren't reading the situation, so they can be taken advantage of quite easily and can be quite trusting of other people and easily sort of misled and just struggle with those daily routines every single day. Like even if it's a routine that they do regularly, it can sometimes take them a lot of time to, really embed that routine into their daily practices. Literacy and numeracy skills. So we see a gap between their potential and their performance. So they have a lot of difficulty retaining that information. So that often is that memory of just keeping that information or learning that new information. So their schoolwork will be quite inconsistent. They will often forget learnt skills quite quickly. So one day they might know how to tell a time, and the next day you revisit it again and they've completely forgotten and need to be retaught it. So lots of repetitive teaching and lots of repetition around those learning areas. Their numeracy skills can sometimes be quite a bit lower than their peers, and that's often because of those abstract concepts such as time and money. Really hard to grasp those concepts because they're not something that's really tangible and they can physically, concretely sort of work with. So it can be really hard for them to grasp those concepts. Motor skills, so difficulty with coordination and balance. So those gross motor skills can sometimes be present, or those fine motor skills. So difficulty like doing up buttons, shoelaces, quite poor handwriting. So you might see, frequent falls and clumsiness. Often these motor skills can impact their sort of social experiences as well, because they often don't have that awareness of where their body ends and can sort of get into people's personal space. So they can be quite clumsy and fall into somebody, which can sort of cause issues with people thinking that it's deliberate when it's more a coordination challenge for them. So just a quick run through of who does the assessment. So as I said, paediatrician and psychiatrists will do the facial features and the medical side of the assessment. And then the other different areas, the domains are assessed by different people, as you can see on the screen. So a psychologist is probably the person that can cover most of the assessment. So if you are limited to getting an assessment, I would suggest seeing a psychologist, because they could actually tick off quite a number of areas of the assessment, which might make it a little bit less costly. It's also important to note that although it's not part of the diagnostic guidelines, there often kids with FASD or people with FASD will have a sensory processing challenge as well. So, and so it's also important to get that assessed, possibly by an OT. As well as it being a brain-based disorder, it's also a whole body disorder. As we saw in that gestational diagram of all those functions and structures that we're developing in those first 12 weeks. So things like heart and lungs and, bone structures and lots of different, body functions are all developing in those early stages. So there's actually 428 conditions associated with FASD and physical conditions associated with FASD. So these are some of the common ones on the screen. So we see often a lot of hearing issues, vision issues. We often see a lot of bone structure issues, so jaw structure, sometimes dental challenges, hypermobility. We also see immuno sort of suppressant sort of issues. We see, getting a little bit of feedback there. We see a bit of some thyroid challenges, diabetes, seizures. So lots of different things that also come with FASD. So it's important to be aware of that there are a lot of physical challenges that they might be experiencing, a lot of bowel issues and things like that as well. So some common characteristics. So as I mentioned earlier, FASD is variable and complex. So each individual will present quite differently and uniquely. So, and we do know that characteristics can change with age and also environment and stress. So we might see symptoms, being more exacerbated with stress, maybe more present at different ages and stages. So it's just something to be aware of. So some of these characteristics not everyone will experience, but these are some of the common ones we do see. So I'd like to start with the strengths first. So individuals with FASD have lots of fantastic strengths. They're often very friendly, and it says highly verbal there, and it's quite true. Even though some have expressive language challenges and not able to express themselves, there are a lot of them that are very good at talking and verbally communicating. So that's sometimes one of their big strengths. They're often very good with hands-on activities and doing activities like really creative mechanics, all those sort of things. So often it's really good for them to be doing something rather than being shown how to do something. They often learn a lot better when they're actually doing the activity themselves. They're often very good with children, elderly people and animals. So it's important to just be aware of their strengths because as we've just talked about a lot of the challenges that they have, but they do have a lot of strengths. So age maturity is one of the most common ones we see, and that's when there's a gap between the person's actual age or their chronological age and their developmental or emotional age. So what we will see is that they might be acting a lot younger than their peers in certain areas or skill levels. Or in some areas, they might be working at a higher level. So it's just something that you need to be aware of so that you can sort of think about where they might be sitting and how to support them. So if we look at this graphic on the screen, it shows one individual. This is not representative of every 18-year-old, but this is one 18-year-old. Their expressive language, so their ability to verbally communicate is quite strong. That's of a 20-year-old. So they actually can communicate quite well in the community. But the problem is that if we go right down to the end, their comprehension is that of a 6-year-old. So they're able to communicate well, but what they're hearing may be misinterpreted or misunderstood. So it's important that we're really checking for understanding. And this can get them into a bit of trouble because they can actually say and commit to doing something or say they understand how to do something, but when it actually comes to doing that actual task, they can't follow through on it because they actually don't understand what they actually required to do. Their reading abilities might be a couple of years below their peers, but again, their comprehension skills could be quite significantly lower. So just being aware of that they might be able to read quite fluently, but just not understand what they're reading. Living skills. So this individual's got a living skills of 11-year-old. So when we're looking at 11-year-olds and what sort of supports and how we would support them with their daily living skills, such as, making their bed, getting ready, cooking meals, cleaning, organising their day, what sort of supports you put in place for an 11-year-old. But this is an 18-year-old that might be living independently. So if they're living independently, they might be really struggling if they're unsupported to be able to look after their personal hygiene, look after their living space, prepare meals, things like that. So it's important that we sort of look at that and we actually accommodate and support those areas. And then, as I mentioned, with that numeracy, understanding those money and time concepts can be really challenging. So if we've got an 18-year-old that's maybe at a job, maybe going to school, maybe has to go to an appointment, and not being able to manage time can be really quite a challenge for them. So they might not get to the appointment on time or may not arrive at work on the day that it actually happens. I actually know of an individual that he's an adult and he got so confused with times and dates that he actually missed his brother's wedding because he wasn't aware. He just got so confused over the times, and nobody had actually supported him in, reminding him or giving him that, maybe picking him up and taking him to the wedding or whatever. So, so that's an example of some of the level of support that someone might need. And then social skills are that of a 7-year-old. So that can be quite challenging. If you're an 18-year-old and you're expected to be understanding and reading social situations, this can be really, really challenging, particularly them getting taken advantage of or put in a situation where they might be, being exposed to harm. And the other flip side of it is that with those social skills quite a lot younger than their age, they're often drawn to people younger than them. So that can sometimes become an issue for sexually appropriate behaviours around safe relationships and consent. So it's really important that we educate these kids from a very young age around those, safety relationships and safe consent as well, so that they're not getting themselves into trouble for misunderstanding the social norms. So some strategies to support this age maturity is really one of the most fantastic things you can do with someone with FASD is actually adjust your expectations. So meeting them where they're at and responding to their emotional age rather than their chronological or their actual age. So by just dropping things down and adjusting your language or the activities that you're doing with them to support their needs, adding extra supports in so that you can support their needs. Because you really do need to sort of lower your expectations and sort of set goals that are going to be achievable, because they may not have the skills to be able to carry out or do that task or understand that what's being asked of them. It's really important that we avoid shaming and blaming. Because what we might see as them being immature or acting inappropriately or being silly is not intentional, and it's because of their brain-based challenges and the misreading and misunderstanding that scenario or situation. So it's important that we put in some supports and education around supporting them in those situations where they may appear to be acting a lot younger than they are. Confabulation, as I mentioned a bit earlier, the one where they appear to be lying. So confabulation is a blending of false memories with real life events. We all confabulate, but some of us do it a lot. Some of it, our brains do a lot more for us than we actually need. So we often see a lot of particularly dementia patients that they will often pull memories together and provide information. This is similar for people with FASD. The brain is just filling in the gaps for them because, as I mentioned, their memory system is so disorganised that to be able to retrieve the information that they're being asked can be really challenging. So the brain sort of fills in the gaps for them and pops in information that will be either false, memories, or that might be, from a TV show or something someone else had done or they'd seen, mixed with what they have done. So this can be a real problem, particularly at school, if they're, saying that something happened in the schoolyard and it didn't happen that way. So they can be accused of lying quite easily. So it's really challenging to quite unpack that to make sure that they're heard and understood, but also getting to the bottom of a situation. It also can pose challenges in the justice system, particularly with giving false, evidence or information, which could lead to, incriminating themselves or getting themselves into trouble when they haven't been involved, or that it's not the right information. So some ways we can support that are avoiding asking redundant questions such as, are you sure that happened? What you can do is sort of tweeze it out, pick it out of them, I suppose. That's not the right word, but sort of ask questions like, can you tell me a bit more? Or, tell me a bit more about that. Or what was that? What happened in that part? So just really sort of unpack it and just give them some time and some space to process it, so that they can actually try and unpack and try and recall what might have actually happened, and try and revisit an incident or an issue in a timely way. Because if you are something happened at school 3 weeks ago and they're trying to address it, today, it can be very difficult for them to recall and remember what might have happened in that event. Avoid consequences for the lies, because most likely it's confabulation and not intentional. So instead, listen and hear them out, and then try and teach them what parts of the story might be false and why they might be false. looking at fairy tales and true stories and really trying to unpack that can sometimes be a good teaching tool. Sometimes they need to be redirected because they can get caught up on what might have happened in an event and maybe, just need to be just redirected and move on from it to just diffuse it or, stop it. So sometimes redirection can help. And also check where it occurred, in what environment it occurred. So if they were highly stressed or anxious, we know that people with FASD are more likely to confabulate if they're under pressure or stress. So sometimes certain environments can cause them to confabulate a lot more. They're often got a bit stronger visual memory, so getting them to draw the sequence of what happened and where it happened can sometimes be helpful in unpacking a situation. So as we talked, memory is a big challenge, and it's often very hard for them to store and process new information and new rules and new strategies. So they need lots of reminders and lots of opportunities to share that information. They also have difficulty transferring information from one situation or setting to another setting. So they'll often need to be taught that information in lots of different settings. Varying ability. So we'll see, some days they'll be, functioning quite well, making connections. Other days it might be a lot harder to get those connections to come. And then some days you might not have any luck with making those connections. So this little picture is drawn by someone who's got FASD, and they liken it to having a faulty light globe. And so that, some days the light globe's working, some days it's blinking, and other days it just won't work. So it's important to be aware of that, and that it's not actually they're deliberately that they're doing that, because a lot of people say you're just being lazy, you did this yesterday, why can't you do it today? It's just physically they haven't got the capacity, their memory skills aren't there to be able to remember that task or remember how to do that task. So this is a friend of mine has this on the wall of her shower to remind her daughter to shower, to wash her body in the shower, because she gets into the shower and just forgets to use the soap. So this is a visual reminder for her that really helps support her memory. Executive function. So some of the things we see are difficulty organising, planning, sequencing, the impulse control, prioritising, following through on things. So they often have a lot of problems with multi-directions or multi-leveled, instructions or rules. So it's really important that we try and break those rules down. So simplify them into really small steps, breaking them right down to almost one step at a time, or even peel it right back. Routines are great because it's not because they like routine, it actually helps them with their memory, it supports their memory. So if you're doing the same thing every day, over time it will embed and they will start to pick up those skills. Sometimes the first then can be really helpful. So first go and brush your teeth, then go to bed. Those sort of things, just breaking down the tasks. Visual schedules can be really good to support their memory, so they're not having to check in and ask all the time. They can look at a visual schedule to remind them what's coming up next. Repeating instructions, but in different ways, can be really helpful. So, you might show them how to do it, you might give them the verbal instruction, and you might follow it up with some visual as well. Making sure that there's limiting there's distractions in the space can be helpful to just help them be a bit more focused. And offering some breaks can help sort of, disrupt that inflexibility or, their ability to initiate a task. So it might be just like, okay, just go and have a bit of a run, or, go and, take the wet washing basket out to the clothesline, just to give them something to break, or, and then get back to it. And to support emotional regulation, it's important that we're modelling as adults or as carers, we're modelling how we actually deal with certain situations. So it's really that self-talk that you might have in your head, you're actually outwardly verbalising that. So, you know, sharing that information as you're doing something, like you might be driving in the car and being frustrated by the traffic, and you might actually talk about why you're feeling that way. Oh, I'm getting so frustrated. The traffic's so busy and it's making me feel really, you know, angry, and it's making me feel really flustered and frustrated, and maybe I might have a sip of water to help me calm down. So giving them some really good language around what's happening for you, but also some strategies that might work to help, that can be a really good way of modelling it. Using emotional charts, they often, if they haven't got the words or the vocab to, you know, name a feeling, sometimes those emotional charts can be really, really helpful. And some calm down spaces can also be helpful. The impulse control, as we said, can be quite difficult and quite dangerous, because they often think before they act and can get themselves into a situation where they might put themselves at risk of harm. You know, often walking along with a phone, they might step out on a road without thinking about needing to look, or they might, a younger child might be at a park and go up to a stranger and put themselves at risk without thinking about the consequences. So those sort of things are important to be aware of. Some of those strategies for the impulse control are, you know, keeping instructions simple, use really short phrases like hands to yourself, wait your turn, using lots of repetition, as I've mentioned, to really internalise those rules and information, and sort of even role play can sometimes really help. So you're sort of pretending you're doing the activity or the rule, like, you know, you're using a quiet voice inside, so you're modelling it, you're practicing it. Those sort of things can sometimes help. Visual cues like stop signs and rules around, you know, visual rules can support and reinforce those expectations. Routines, obviously, predictable routines can help, so they know what's coming up next, so that they're not likely to become escalated and start sort of acting impulsively, and allow for those, you know, physical breaks or downtime. As I mentioned, those sensory processing difficulties can be a challenge. Some individuals can be hypersensitive, so it can be really, you know, affected by noise or light or crowds. Other people can be hyposensitive, so things like pain, not registering pain, not understanding when they're hungry or thirsty, and that can really, you know, dysregulate them. They can be highly tactile, so love touching things and feeling things, or tactile defensive, so not like certain feels of materials on their skin or food in their mouth. So by identifying what those triggers are can be really, really helpful in supporting those stages where they might be escalating into meltdowns or becoming overreacting to a situation. So it's really good to be sort of aware and to put some supports in place. So, you know, if they're quite sensitive to noise, you know, noise cancelling earphones, or, you know, a quieter environment. One individual with FASD said the fluorescent lights in the classroom used to bother him so much, you know, they were so loud, and made it really difficult for him to learn. And then, you know, addressing that hunger by providing, you know, opportunities to have, you know, snacks across the day or things like that to help support that. Sleep difficulty is a major problem for individuals with FASD, having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, getting that restorative night's sleep. One individual talked to me like it's like electricity running through their body the whole night. So we all know sleep deprivation can affect all of us at any time, and the way we function and how we can get through a day. For people with FASD, it can be a real issue and really exacerbate their symptoms, so make their memory challenges a lot harder, their cognitive challenges, they're a lot harder, their emotional regulation a lot harder to manage. So it's just important to be aware, and rest days can sometimes be useful for a reset. you know, lots of sleep hygiene. And although a lot of families do work around good sleep hygiene, no devices in the evening and things like that, but it can be very, very tricky to navigate because it can be a real challenge for individuals. So these are some of the characteristics that we might see across the lifespan. So in infancy, we might see them having feeding issues, sleep issues. They might have really poor muscle tone, so just not, you know, reaching for things very well, or holding up their head, inability, irritability, and sensitivity to light, so really, you know, big startle response. Often can have poor bonding and delayed milestone, so, you know, really, you know, sitting quite late or walking quite late. In early childhood, we often see them being quite over-friendly and social, which can put them in that danger awareness space. You know, one mum says her daughter runs up to people in the park and gives them hugs. They can often have that short attention span, be quite hyperactive, and their speech can be often quite advanced, but they actually don't have a really good vocabulary, like a good understanding of that vocabulary. Then early school age, we're seeing that some of those math skills can be a real challenge. Often we see that their reading and spelling sometimes isn't picked up at those early stages, because they're sort of sitting alongside their peers. As they, you know, develop through the primary school age, we do start to see that gap. So it can be often, their verbal skills can often mask their challenges, as we see in that middle school age group. And we often start to see those really physical development and the delayed cognitive abilities at that middle to primary school age. And then in adolescence, we often see with that transition to high school can be a real challenge, because they've gone from a reasonably structured sort of environment where they're maybe just in one classroom for the day, maybe, you know, attending library or art or some sport or something like that. But it's really quite contained. They've got the same teacher. Everything's quite sort of, you know, it's structured. Whereas in high school, they might be going to lots of different rooms, having to have lots of different books and things for different subjects, and it can be really, really challenging. So we often see a lot of school dropout around that age. We often see a lot of behavioural disruption as well, where they are noticing the differences between them and their peers, and so they are acting out. They often, we often see sort of involvement with substance use and justice around these stages as well, due to their impulsivity, but also that peer manipulation as well. And then in adults, we might see them difficulty holding down a job, difficulty with, you know, living independently. If they're a parent themselves, they might have challenges parenting, and they might have poor social skills and relationships, and also at risk of that substance use. So supporting people with FASD, remembering it is a permanent brain injury and the brain doesn't repair itself over time. But what we do know is that with the right supports, individuals with FASD can learn. They just learn differently, and we can improve their learning and life outcomes by supporting it correctly. So as I talked about earlier, those strengths that individuals have, it's really important that we really embrace their strengths and work out what they're good at, and use those strengths to help support their challenges. So if they're really good at drawing and they often have trouble with their emotional regulation, use them, you know, put a drawing table together and let them draw to help them regulate. You know, lots of skills that they might be really good at. They might be great at building stuff. So, you know, get them to build something and show you that, you know, through building, rather than getting them to write, you know, 3 paragraphs on a computer or something. I don't know, but, you know, it just using those strengths that they have to really support their challenges. So we have sort of 3 principles that we like to sort of work with when we're supporting someone with FASD, and that the first one is changing our understanding, and this is a really key one. If we can shift the way we're thinking about what we're seeing and what the behaviours are, we can actually you know, really have a different perspective on what's going on. So we have the can't versus won't mindset. And so often with kids with FASD, it comes across that they won't do something, but it's actually that they can't because they actually are missing a skill. And it's not because they don't want to do it. It's just because they actually don't have the ability to carry that through. And that might be that they don't have the understanding of what's required for them to do. They might not have the cognitive abilities to stretch themselves to be able to do the task that's been set in front of them. They might not have the emotional regulation skills to manage that environment. So it's really important to sort of see them as, rather than their behaviour, as their what's going on for them in their brain and what missing skill or lagging ability that they might have. So rather than trying to work out how you can stop that behaviour, and thinking about why is that behaviour happening? What's that behaviour communicating? And it's usually something that's going on for them in one of their domains. So always think brain. I can't emphasize this enough. Thinking about what's causing them to be overwhelmed. Is it something that's going on? Is it their poor memory? Have we given them too much information and they just don't know where to start? And so they're getting agitated and escalated. So really thinking about the environment and the situation. So second, we're adjusting those expectations, and this is around that dysmaturity. So we're the ones that need to be flexible and willing to adapt. And often what we see with individuals with FASD, that a strategy might work for quite some time and then all of a sudden it doesn't work. So we need to be flexible and pivot and try other things. We also need to be realistic with our expectations, not expecting them something that they can't achieve. And particularly thinking about that, what their actual age is and what their emotional age is and developmental age is, and really working towards, meeting them where they're at. Try and depersonalize the behaviour. So instead of saying, when you say that, it really hurts people's feelings, instead of saying that, using that word can sometimes make people feel upset. So taking it away from them, because they're often getting into trouble a lot because of their, brain-based differences. It puts them in that situation where they're often doing things wrong or not following through. And remembering that brain-based disability, and that it's a permanent disability, and also listen. I mean, you as the caregivers really are the experts, and listen to them as well, because they often, if you collaborate with them and unpack situations and scenarios, sometimes you can work out some strategies and some things that might help next time. But I emphasise this when you're sharing with schools or other professionals. The things that really work for you, and that work. It's really important that you communicate that, because that does help keep consistency across different settings. And third is managing the environment. So, we almost have to be their personal assistant or their, that prefrontal lobe, just understanding what the environment might trigger for them, and trying to mitigate that by putting things in place, but also giving them that modelling and demonstrating how to respond in certain situations. Lots of practice around that and role play around that can really help with when they are in a situation where it might be overwhelming or triggering, that they can actually draw on those skills that you've practiced, and often making sure that there's finding out where there is a sensory or a calming space can sometimes help just shift the attention and help reduce that chance of escalation. But it can be very challenging. So these are what we call like the 8 golden rules of looking after someone with FASD. Structure and routine is paramount. So often people say that they have the same meal times every day. They have the same way that they get dressed in the morning. So or get ready for school or wherever they're going in the morning. It's they might eat breakfast first, and then they might go and brush their teeth, and then they might get dressed or something. It depends on what your routine is, but doing that every day will really help embed it and help it be much more predictable for them, so that they don't get into that stage where they're melting down because they're really unsure what they need to do next, and that escalating their behaviour. Around language, we really need to keep our language really concrete and simple, not using sort of fancy words or idioms, and sarcasm and things like that. We need to keep it really short and simple when we're giving information. So not overloading them with lots of information, because their memory just can't cope with that level of information. So really breaking it down into shorter bites of information, and really be specific in what you actually want or mean. Is, instead of saying, no, you can't go over there, but you can go over there, just say, go over there, and give them the information and the direction and the structure about where they need to go, rather than putting all these other things in place, because likelihood they've remembered you can go over there instead of the space where they were supposed to go, because they haven't taken all the information in correctly. Repetition is really important. It can be exhausting, but you will have to reteach, and often don't assume once you sort of feel like they've grasped something that they've actually got it. You still might have to, occasionally reteach that. I know someone who's an adult that you had 2 weeks off his job, and then went back to put his work boots on, and he'd been wearing thongs the whole time he was off, and then went to try and lace up his work boots and couldn't remember how to do his shoelaces up. So if they're not doing it, often they lose it. So it's important to just be aware of that. Supervision, lots of supervision, just that extra level of supervision, particularly in unstructured environments, because they need, because of their impulse and their poor memory and attention, they do need that extra support and guidance around keeping safe. So I'm just going to quickly go through some resources, and then we'll have some time to have a chat. We have lots of wealth of resources, and particularly for parents, caregivers and families, on our website. We have Families Linking with Families group, which I mentioned earlier, which is a free online 7-week program, and it is a program that is run by, is peer-led, so it's a supported, safe space where everyone is sharing their experiences about FASD. So it's definitely worthwhile finding out more about that. FASD Connect is a monthly, it's a new service that we're providing. It's a monthly online group that is just a space where people living with FASD, parents and caregivers and families can just have a space and share information and what might be happening for them at that moment, and sort of just unpack it in a safe environment. We also have FASD, in Foundations in FASD, a free online course, which is a deeper delve into what FASD is and its impacts. This is often a really good one to share with support workers or professionals that might be working with your child, because it can give them more information about FASD. Okay, we're up to questions.